Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, June 17th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, we are looking at a high of 86.5 degrees and a low of 61.4 degrees. It should be a pleasant day for those in the area. Coming up, we are taking a closer look at how federal agents worked to uncover and prevent a domestic extremist plot aimed at the White House. We will also dive into the serious privacy concerns arising from the implementation of artificial intelligence within therapy sessions. In addition to these topics, we have several other important stories making headlines today to help you stay informed. There is plenty to get into, so stay with us for the full report right here on Alex's News. Good morning, everyone. We're following a stunning national security story out of Washington this morning, where federal agents say they disrupted a violent plot against a major UFC event held right on the south lawn of the White House. For more on this, we're joined by our reporter, Ethan. Ethan, good to have you. Walk us through what we're learning.
Good morning, Grace. So according to PBS NewsHour and The Guardian, court documents unsealed in Cincinnati describe a group calling itself the Vanguard of the Old, sometimes the Vanguard of the Old Republic, that planned what they themselves called a mass casualty event. The target was UFC Freedom 250, held this past Sunday, June 14th, just 3 days ago. That event doubled as a celebration of the nation's 250th anniversary and President Donald Trump's 80th birthday. Investigators say the goal was, in their words, to jumpstart a second American Revolution.
That's chilling. And I understand the plan had multiple phases. How exactly was this supposed to unfold?
Right, it was laid out in 3 phases through encrypted text messages, Grace. Phase 1 was a diversion, where small drones rigged with explosives would be flown over the north side of the White House to trigger a panicked evacuation of the South Lawn. Phase 2 was the kill zone, with 5 separate sniper teams positioned along the southern evacuation route. And Phase 3 was a breach, a second wave of attackers preparing to storm the White House gates during the chaos.
And the snipers had specific names on their target list?
They did. Plans recovered by the FBI instructed the snipers to eliminate what they called high-value targets first. That list included President Trump, who was referred to in chats simply as one, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk. Only after those targets were hit were the snipers to engage security forces, like the Secret Service and the National Guard. Tyson Proper also reportedly singled out several lawmakers for targeting because of their support for Israel.
Tell us about the suspects themselves. Who are these 5 men?
5 men from across the country are now in federal custody on conspiracy and attempted murder charges, according to The Guardian and CBS News. The alleged team leader is Tyson C. Proper, just 19 years old, from Ohio. Prosecutors say he spent $3,000 on an AR-style rifle and tactical gear. Then there's Abraham Hermosillo Alvarez, 31, from Nebraska, who went online by the name Shepard and allegedly coordinated the sniper and drone elements. Michael Allen Thomas, 32, of California, used the alias Whiskey 6 America and is described as a primary planner. Also charged are Brian Omar Roa, 24, of California, alias Noble 6, and Daniel K. Eskridge, 32, of Missouri.
What do we know about their motivations? What was driving this group?
The American press described their motivations as, quote, a tangled web, end quote. It was a mix of anti-government sentiment, anti-Semitic grievances, and fury over the administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Members talked about the United States needing to be, quote, torn down so that it could be rebuilt, end quote, and they traded conspiracy theories about a powerful elite running the country. So it doesn't fit neatly into one ideological box, and that's part of what's making this so unsettling for investigators.
Now, this could have been catastrophic. How did the FBI even find out about it?
This is a remarkable detail, Grace. According to PBS NewsHour, the entire investigation was triggered on June 10th, just 4 days before the event, when Tyson Proper's own mother contacted local law enforcement in Ohio. She was alarmed by his sudden purchase of firearms, and his communications with an online group he told her was, quote, Christian-based and ex-military, end quote. Proper was actually briefly hospitalized for homicidal ideation before the FBI stepped in. From there, agents got access to encrypted chats on Signal and SimpleX, including a primary group called Hunters with roughly 23 participants.
23 people. So this was much bigger than the 5 who've been arrested.
Exactly, and that's a critical piece of this story. Those chats reportedly contain detailed maps, aerial photographs of the White House, and discussions of safe houses in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Investigators have recovered high-powered rifles, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and tactical armor. But here's where it gets complicated. CBS News and Fox News both report agents have not recovered any functional, explosive-laden drones. Court records suggest the group was still trying to scrape together about $1,300 for the drones and charges in the days right before the attack.
That gap between the plan on paper and what they actually had in hand, that's got to be raising some questions, right?
It absolutely is, and it's already become political. On June 16th, that's yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance went on Fox News and downplayed the threat. He said the suspects, quote, weren't in town, end quote, and, quote, didn't even get close to the point of execution, end quote. But that's the opposite of what FBI Director Kash Patel said on X, where he claimed the attack was, quote, stopped cold, end quote, and called it a sophisticated attempt to overthrow the government. So you've got two senior officials painting very different pictures of how serious this was.
And there's also some real tension between federal agencies over how this was handled. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, this rift went public on Tuesday. Secret Service Deputy Director Matthew Quinn openly criticized the FBI for announcing the arrest so quickly. He called Director Patel's announcement premature and described it, in a pretty vivid phrase, as, quote, choking on your own smoke, end quote. According to The Guardian, the Secret Service had actually led this investigation from the beginning and wanted to keep things quiet so they could make more arrests. Remember, there are still about 18 other members of that network under surveillance.
And have any of those other 18 been picked up since the announcement?
As of today, June 17th, no additional suspects have been taken into custody, though officials say they remain under intense federal surveillance. The concern Quinn raised is that going public so fast may have tipped off the rest of the network, given them time to scatter, destroy evidence, or go dark on their encrypted channels, so that institutional friction isn't just bureaucratic squabbling. It could have real consequences for whether more arrests happen.
Let's turn to the courts. What happened with Tyson Proper today?
At a federal detention hearing in Columbus, Ohio this morning, Proper was ordered held without bond. Federal prosecutors argued he poses a significant danger to the community, pointing to his lead role in the vanguard of the old and his own admitted homicidal ideations. His defense has asked for a mental health evaluation, which makes sense given the hospitalization back on June 10th. The other 4 defendants are facing the same core charges: conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder of a federal officer.
And what about President Trump? He was at the event. Has he weighed in?
He has. President Trump attended UFC Freedom 250 on Sunday without incident, and he's now at the G7 summit in France. He told reporters there that he had not been briefed on the plot in advance, which is itself a notable claim given how senior the targets were. Meanwhile, the White House has reportedly used this foiled plot to justify the $600 million construction of a new bunker and ballroom in the East Wing, a project that's been controversial and is now being framed as protection against future drone-based threats.
One last question, Ethan. With those 18 people still out there, what are investigators most worried about right now?
The honest answer is the unknowns, Grace. They have the encrypted chat logs, they have the maps, they have aerial photos of the White House, and they have the safe house locations in Fredericksburg, Virginia. But they don't have everyone, and they don't have the drones. So the question is whether this network had other cells, other plans, or the capacity to regroup quickly. The fact that a 19-year-old's mother is the reason any of this came to light, just 4 days before the event, has a lot of people in the national security community asking how close this really came, regardless of what the vice president said yesterday.
A remarkable and deeply unsettling story. Ethan, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us this morning.
Happy to do it, Grace.
And in our second story this morning, we're turning to a major shift happening inside California therapy rooms. Artificial intelligence is now sitting in on some of the most private conversations patients ever have. Our reporter Chloe has been digging into this. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yes, this is one of those stories where the technology has moved faster than the law, and frontline workers are sounding alarms. At the center of it is Kaiser Permanente, which back in 2024 announced a sweeping rollout of an AI tool called Abridge. According to CalMatters and LAist, that tool is now operating in 40 hospitals and more than 600 medical offices across 8 states and the District of Columbia. And it's not just recording physical exams. It's listening in on mental health sessions, too.
So, Chloe, when we say it's listening, what exactly is this tool doing during an appointment?
Great question. Abridge is what's called an ambient listening tool, meaning it records the entire conversation in real time. Then it uses generative AI to turn that audio into a structured clinical note, what doctors call a SOAP note. That stands for subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. So instead of the clinician scribbling during your visit, the software drafts the paperwork for them automatically.
And I imagine doctors love getting some of that paperwork off their plate. Is that the main selling point?
It really is. ABC News and NPR have reported that providers often spend 2 hours on documentation for every 1 hour with a patient. Clinicians call the after-hours charting pajama time because they're literally finishing notes from bed. Brian Hoberman, Chief Information Officer for the Permanente Medical Group, told CalMatters the technology supports doctors' well-being and was rolled out only after diligent testing. So Kaiser frames this as a fix for burnout in a workforce that's stretched dangerously thin.
That sounds reasonable on its face. But you mentioned alarms from frontline workers. What are they actually saying?
The pushback is coming largely from the National Union of Healthcare Workers, or NUHW. They argue the tool is being used to push what they call mechanized care. Ilana Marcucci-Morris, a licensed clinical social worker at Kaiser Psychiatry in Oakland, told CalMatters that managers frequently recommend Abridge as a way to handle heavier and heavier patient loads. She described that pressure as coercive because providers worry they'll face discipline for falling behind on paperwork if they don't use it.
So clinicians feel cornered. What about the consent process for patients sitting in the chair?
That's where things get murkier. Kaiser does require patients to give verbal consent before recording starts. But providers like Ligia Pacheco, a psychiatric social worker, told CalMatters they themselves have been denied specifics about how the data is handled, where it's stored, and who has access. And Marcucci-Morris pointed out a subtle issue. When patients are told the tool helps reduce doctor burnout, they may feel guilty saying no, and that guilt alone can change how openly they speak.
Which in therapy is everything. Let's talk about privacy law for a moment. Aren't therapy notes supposed to get extra protection?
They are, and this is a really important wrinkle. Under HIPAA, what are called psychotherapy notes get heightened protection. They have to be stored separately from the patient's general medical record because they contain intimate details of the conversation. The catch is that, as of June 2026, the summaries Abridge produces for Kaiser don't legally qualify as psychotherapy notes.
Wait, why not? They're literally generated from a therapy session.
Because of how they're designed. The AI is capturing symptoms, medication monitoring, and treatment plans, partly to streamline billing. That classifies them as standard clinical progress notes. Once those notes land in the electronic health record, the EHR, they become accessible to health plan administrators and insurance adjusters for what's called utilization management. That means insurers can review granular details of talk therapy to decide medical necessity or to justify denying further treatment.
So the curtain around the therapy room essentially comes down.
That's exactly how critics describe it. They say the traditional veil of the therapy room is being lifted. a human therapist used to filter out tangential or sensitive material when writing notes. The AI doesn't filter. It captures the whole encounter, which advocates call a high-fidelity digital artifact of someone's raw emotional state.
That phrase is chilling. What are the data security concerns beyond the insurance piece?
Kaiser says its system meets all HIPAA requirements and that audio recordings are kept for no longer than 14 days. But the move from a human-filtered note to a verbatim AI capture greatly expands the data footprint. Nicole Alvarez, a senior analyst for technology policy at the Center for American Progress, told CalMatters that a record of someone's lowest moments could be weaponized later. She specifically mentioned child custody cases, employment disputes, and immigration matters. Once it exists in writing, it can be subpoenaed.
That moves this from a workplace dispute to a much bigger civil rights question. Is this playing out in court yet?
It is. Back in April of this year, just 2 months ago, a bellwether class action lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of California. It's called Washington et al. Versus Sutter Health et al. LAist and legal news outlets reported alleges that healthcare systems, including Sutter and Memorial Care, used Abridge to record patients without meaningful, informed consent.
And what laws does the suit say were violated?
3 big ones. First, the California Invasion of Privacy Act, known as CIPA, which requires all-party consent for recording confidential communications. Second, the Confidentiality of Medical Information Act, or CMIA, for unauthorized disclosure to a third party, in this case Abridge itself. And third, the Federal Wiretap Act. So this is a serious legal package.
Is Kaiser named in that suit?
Not in this specific one, at least not as of today, June 17, 2026. But Kaiser isn't exactly in the clear. It recently finalized a $47.5 million settlement related to tracking pixels on its patient portals. That signals it is vulnerable to privacy litigation. And 2 new California laws, AB 489 and AB 3030, took effect January 1st of this year. They empower the California Medical Board to fine providers who don't clearly disclose when AI is interacting with patients or generating clinical content.
So there's real regulatory teeth now. What about the labor side? You mentioned NUHW earlier.
Right. NUHW members held a 1-day strike on March 18th of this year to protest the unilateral rollout of these AI tools. The union has also filed complaints with the California Department of Managed Healthcare, the DMHC. That agency is already monitoring Kaiser under a $200 million settlement tied to behavioral health deficiencies. So the regulator looking at AI complaints is the same regulator already watching Kaiser's mental health practices.
That's a lot of scrutiny stacking up at once. What does Kaiser and what does Abridge say in response?
Both companies maintain that this technology is a necessary evolution. They argue it's helping save a healthcare workforce that's genuinely struggling under documentation overload. And it's worth saying the burnout problem is real. Pajama time is real. But the question advocates keep raising is whether the cost, what they call the digitalization of intimacy, is being paid by the patients who have the least power in the room.
For viewers who may be heading into a therapy appointment this week, what should they know about their rights?
A few clear things. Advocates emphasize that patients have the legal right to say no to being recorded. You don't have to consent, even if the provider mentions it casually. You also have the right, under the 21st Century Cures Act, to review your clinical notes, so you can actually log in and read what the AI captured about you. And if something looks wrong or too detailed, you can raise it with the provider or file a complaint.
Really practical advice. Last question, Chloe. Where does this go from here?
A lot depends on the Washington versus Sutter Health case and how aggressively the California Medical Board enforces those new AI disclosure laws. If courts find that ambient recording violates CIPA or the Wiretap Act, the whole industry model could be forced to change overnight. In the meantime, expect more strikes, more complaints to the DMHC, and a continuing tug-of-war between efficiency and intimacy inside the therapy room.
Fascinating and important reporting. Chloe, thank you so much for walking us through it this morning.
Thank you, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Millions of Americans are finding it harder to bring home the bacon after the implementation of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed in July 2025. Federal data confirms that the Hunger Games have become a reality for 4,200,000 recipients who have been sliced from the program rolls since the start of last year. Among those feeling the pinch are 770,000 children who might find their lunchboxes a little lighter. These cuts really took a bite out of families on June 1, 2026, as the government began making older adults work for their bread, extending community engagement requirements to those aged 64. This has been the largest reduction in food assistance in modern history, particularly impacting seniors and non-citizens. A coalition of 23 state attorneys general, led by officials from Maryland and New York, is trying to cultivate support for the 2026 Farm Bill, warning that if the Senate doesn't dish out more funding, state governments and local charities will be left holding the bag for billions in costs. Crossing the pond, the path to peace is hitting a major roadblock in the Middle East. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated yesterday that the tentative agreement to end the war with the United States is currently on thin ice, contingent upon a full Israeli military withdrawal from southern Lebanon. While Araghchi insists the conflict hasn't reached its final curtain call without this exit, U.S. officials and leaked documents suggest the interim accord was only meant to be an immediate ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is standing his ground, refusing to be bullied out of Lebanese security zones. This diplomatic tug-of-war is threatening to sink a landmark memorandum of understanding, scheduled for signature this Friday at a Swiss resort, which aimed to keep the oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. G7 leaders meeting in France are now calling for a robust ceasefire before the situation boils over into a resumption of all-out war. In the world of finance, new Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh is having a trial by fire during his first policy meeting today, June 17, 2026. He is tasked with cooling down an economy where the annual inflation rate hit a three-year high of 4.2% in May. This spike was primarily fueled by soaring energy costs and supply chain kinks linked to the ongoing friction with Iran. While President Trump is leaning on the Fed to drop rates like they're hot, Warsh is widely expected to keep things steady to put the brakes on rising prices. The new chair might also be looking to connect the dots by eliminating the dot plot of interest rate projections, marking a major structural shift in how the central bank communicates. Environmental regulators are also under fire for a policy shift that seems to be full of hot air. The EPA is moving to weaken methane regulations for low-producing stripper wells, a move that provides a gas-sized boost to billionaire Jeffrey Hildebrand and his company, Hilcorp. While these wells only account for 6% of domestic production, scientific data indicates they are responsible for half of the industry's methane emissions. Talk about a small well with a big mouth. The Environmental Defense Fund has filed a lawsuit to block the rollbacks, especially after a McGill University study found that microbial leaks from non-producing wells are 1,000 times higher than previous estimates. Meanwhile, states like Ohio and Texas are trying to plug the gap by using federal funds to seal thousands of abandoned sites. Finally, a new kind of data mining is causing a stir at the United Nations. Investigative reports reveal a digital colonialism crisis where the U.S. government is demanding access to the personal data of African citizens, potentially violating local sovereignty. At a conference in Accra, Ghanaian President John Mahama joined other regional leaders to warn against a digital land grab by foreign tech monopolies. Meanwhile, officials in Indonesia are worried that global platforms are putting the next generation in filter bubbles that erode critical thinking. It seems the world is finally waking up to the fact that in the digital age, if you aren't at the table, your data might be on the menu. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.